in the quiet space between humanity's first breath and its first recorded act of violence. A heavy stillness hangs over the ancient world like a veil of unspoken tension. As if creation itself is holding its breath while the fragile hearts of the first brothers move toward a moment that will echo through every generation that follows. The early morning light settles softly across the land east of Eden, where the soil is still young and the air carries the faint memory of a garden now closed. And Cain moves through the fields with the practiced familiarity of one who has learned to coax life from stubborn ground. He feels the weight of the harvest in his hands, the rough texture of the earth still clinging to the produce he gathers. And though the world is new, the ache of labor is already ancient, pulsing through his muscles with every step. Nearby, Abel tends his flock with a gentler rhythm, guiding the animals with quiet patience. His movements shaped by the calm trust that passes between shepherd and creature in a world not yet hardened by centuries of human striving. The brothers walk toward the place where offerings are given, each carrying the work of his hands, each shaped by the calling that has grown from the soil beneath their feet. Cain's offering is the fruit of the ground, gathered with effort and sweat, while Abel brings the firstborn of his flock, the choice portions set aside with deliberate reverence. There is no rivalry spoken between them, no words exchanged that hint at the storm forming beneath the surface. Only the silent contrast of two lives unfolding side by side, each seeking to honor the God who formed them. When the moment comes, the acceptance of Abel's offering and the rejection of Cain's fall like a sudden fracture across the stillness. And the unspoken tension becomes a living thing that coils around Cain's heart, tightening with every breath he takes, urging him toward a path he does not yet understand. And in this fragile moment of rising emotion, you may choose to like this story as a way of acknowledging the weight of what is unfolding. Cain stands alone after the offering, the air around him thick with a heaviness he cannot name. And the ground beneath his feet feels unsteady, as though the very soil he has worked so faithfully now resists him. The sting of rejection burns deeper than he expected, not merely as a wound to his pride, but as a fracture in his identity. For he has poured himself into the earth, shaping its yield with relentless determination. And now the God who sees all has turned his face toward Abel instead. Abel, unaware of the turmoil rising within his brother, moves with the quiet humility of one who has simply offered what he has. His steps unburdened by the weight that presses upon Cain's chest. The voice of God breaks through the turmoil, not with thunder or fire, but with a question that pierces the heart. Why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? The words linger in the air, gentle yet unyielding, revealing the truth Cain has not spoken aloud. God warns him that sin is crouching at the door, its desire for him fierce and consuming, yet he is told he must rule over it. The warning is not condemnation, but invitation, a call to mastery, a chance to step back from the precipice before the darkness within him takes shape. But Cain's heart is already shifting, the ground of his spirit cracking beneath the weight of envy and wounded pride. And though the warning echoes in his mind, it does not settle deeply enough to change the path he is beginning to walk. The story moves now toward a moment that will shape not only the lives of these first brothers, but the entire human story. And the tension between choice and consequence begins to tighten like a cord drawn taut across the unfolding narrative. Cain calls to Abel, his voice steady on the surface, yet trembling beneath with something neither of them has ever encountered. And the two brothers walk out into the open field where the horizon stretches wide and unbroken, a place where the world feels too young to hold the weight of what is about to unfold. Abel moves with the same quiet trust that has always marked his steps, unaware that the storm inside Cain has grown into something fierce and consuming, shaped by the sting of rejection and the shadow of envy that has taken root in the soil of his heart. The field is silent except for the soft rustle of grass beneath their feet, and the sky above them bears witness to a moment that will carve itself into the memory of humanity, a moment where choice and consequence collide with devastating force. Cain's thoughts churn like a rising flood, each one pushing him closer to the edge. And though the warning from God still echoes faintly in his mind, it is drowned out by the relentless pulse of wounded pride. Abel turns toward him with the open expression of a brother who expects nothing but peace, and in that fragile instant, the world holds its breath once more. Then the act comes suddenly, a violent rupture in the stillness. And the ground that Cain has worked with his hands receives the blood of his brother, marking the first time creation has tasted death. The earth, once a place of life and promise, becomes a witness to the fracture of human relationship, and the silence that follows is heavier than any words could bear. As the weight of what has happened settles over the field, the story invites you to pause and reflect on the gravity of this ancient moment. And if the unfolding depth of this narrative moves you, you may choose to subscribe as a way of staying connected to the journey this story continues to reveal. The murder of Abel stands as one of the earliest recorded acts of violence in human history, and when examined through the lens of archaeology and ancient cultural memory, it aligns with patterns found across early civilizations that sought to explain the origins of bloodshed, rivalry, and fractured human relationships. Many ancient Near Eastern cultures preserve stories of the first killing, often linking it to divine displeasure, jealousy, or the breakdown of social order, suggesting that humanity has long grappled with the question of how violence first entered the world. In Sumerian and Akkadian traditions, tales of brothers or close companions turning against one another appear as symbolic explanations for the tensions that shaped early societies, reflecting the deep human struggle to understand the roots of conflict. Archaeological evidence from early settlements reveals that interpersonal violence emerged alongside the rise of agriculture. As communities grew more complex and competition for resources intensified. Skeletal remains from Neolithic sites show signs of trauma consistent with conflict, indicating that violence was not an anomaly but a growing reality in the early human story. The biblical narrative captures this shift with striking clarity, portraying the first murder not as an accident of circumstance but as the result of a moral and spiritual fracture. A moment where the human heart turns inward and allows envy to overshadow relationship. The ground that absorbs Abel's blood echoes ancient beliefs that the earth itself bears witness to injustice. A theme found in multiple cultures where spilled blood cries out for divine response. The divine confrontation that follows reflects a broader ancient understanding that violence disrupts not only human relationships, but the harmony of creation itself, demanding accountability and restoration. Cain's act becomes a symbol of humanity's capacity for both creation and destruction, revealing how quickly the gift of life can be twisted by the shadows within. And as the weight of this evidence settles into the narrative, you may choose to share this story if its depth and historical resonance speak to something within you. Cain wanders through the field in the aftermath of the act, his breath unsteady and his hands trembling as the weight of what he has done settles over him like a shroud. And the world around him feels suddenly foreign, as though creation itself recoils from the violence that has broken its early innocence. The ground he once worked with confidence now seems to resist him, its familiar scent replaced by the metallic trace of blood that lingers in the air, and every step he takes feels heavier than the last. When the voice of God comes again, it is not with the gentle warning of before, but with a question that pierces deeper than any blade. Where is Abel, your brother? The words echo through the field, reverberating through the silence that follows, and Cain's reply, "Am I my brother's keeper?" falls flat against the gravity of the moment, a fragile attempt to hide what cannot be concealed. God's response carries the weight of divine sorrow and justice intertwined, declaring that Abel's blood cries out from the ground, a poetic and devastating image that reflects ancient beliefs about the earth bearing witness to human wrongdoing. The curse that follows is not arbitrary, but deeply connected to Cain's identity, severing him from the soil he has relied upon, turning the ground into a mirror of his fractured spirit. He is marked not for destruction, but for protection, a paradox that reveals the complexity of divine mercy even in the face of human violence. The mark becomes a boundary, a sign that vengeance will not be allowed to spiral unchecked, preserving Cain even as he walks into exile. As Cain turns away from the place where his brother fell, the world feels larger and more uncertain. And the path before him stretches into a future shaped by both judgment and grace. A reminder that even in humanity's darkest moments, the story does not end in silence. And if the weight of this ancient turning point resonates with you, you may choose to like this narrative as a way of acknowledging the depth of what it reveals. The story of Cain and Abel stands at the crossroads of archaeology, ancient culture, and theological insight, offering one of the earliest windows into how humanity understood violence, justice, and divine involvement in the unfolding human story. Archaeological evidence from early Mesopotamian settlements reveals a world in transition, where the rise of agriculture created new social structures, new tensions, and new forms of conflict. The contrast between Cain, the farmer, and Abel, the shepherd, reflects this early societal divide. A pattern seen in multiple ancient texts where pastoral and agricultural identities symbolize competing values, economic pressures, and differing relationships to land and mobility. The biblical narrative captures this tension with remarkable clarity, embedding it within a family story that becomes a microcosm of humanity's broader struggles. The motif of blood crying out from the ground aligns with ancient beliefs that the earth itself participates in moral order, a concept found in Sumerian, Akkadian, and later Near Eastern traditions where spilled blood demands divine attention. This idea reflects a worldview in which creation is not passive but responsive, bearing witness to injustice and calling for resolution. The mark placed on Cain also fits within ancient protective symbols, where individuals under divine judgment could simultaneously be shielded from human retaliation, preserving social stability and preventing cycles of vengeance. This duality, judgment paired with mercy, reveals a theological depth that resonates across cultures, portraying a God who confronts wrongdoing without abandoning the wrongdoer. Textual analysis shows that the narrative is crafted with deliberate literary precision, using repetition, contrast, and symbolic imagery to convey themes of responsibility, identity, and the consequences of moral choice. The question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" becomes a defining moment in the human story, echoing through later texts and traditions as a challenge to communal responsibility and ethical accountability. The story's enduring power lies in its ability to bridge the ancient and the modern, revealing how the earliest human conflicts continue to shape our understanding of justice, relationship, and the fragile balance between creation and destruction. It stands not merely as a tale of the first murder, but as a profound exploration of what it means to be human in a world where every choice carries weight. The story of Cain and Abel lingers like a quiet echo in the human heart, reminding us that even in the earliest chapters of our history, the struggle between envy and devotion, fracture and mercy, has shaped the world we walk through today. And the God who witnessed that first wound still calls us to see the weight of our choices with clarity and reverence. And if this journey through the ancient world has stirred something in you, you may choose to subscribe as a way of staying connected to the unfolding depth these stories continue to reveal.